Everyone can see that?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Great, so my name is Marisa Lyons Longworth. I'm representing the Crime and Security Research Institute, and today I'm presenting Liking Disinformation, Characterising Disinformation Networks Formed by Like Interactions on Twitter. So this presentation was part of our huge project that many people worked on to do with a network that was China linked and propagating disinformation that was pro-CCP, which is the Chinese Communist Party. To kind of summarize what we worked on in this presentation, I've decided to look at it from the angle of behaviors of disinformation actors. So I'm not going to focus so much on the content of them, but how they put these messages across. So to give you a bit of a taste of that, I'm going to talk about the overall quantitative analysis, but really the crux of this presentation is what I worked on, which is profiling clusters qualitatively. And so to kick us off, we've got the screenshot of the it's getting traction of over 140 retweets and more than 20 likes. So looking at this, we thought we can't map this network, if it is a part of one, through the followers and following. So instead, my colleague Andrew Dawson linked this to other accounts through the likes to see if there was a network. And there was. So on the top left-hand corner, you can see the network graph. And the nodes, which are the circles, are the accounts, and the lines are likes between them. Now, on a normal Twitter analysis, we would maybe expect to see a huge clump of people liking each other. But what we can see here is a really interesting structure where there's definite clusters of different accounts liking each other with minimal links between them. So this was the first signal that this was coordinated. We then move on to an analysis that my colleague David Tuxworth did, where we took all the date and timestamps of these tweets and mapped them of when they happened. And as you can see, if you sort of turn your head to the side, you can see that these accounts were tweeting Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, even with an hour in the middle for lunch between 12 and 1. And so this took us beyond the thought that this was coordinated, and in fact, took it more into the realm of this is a type of employment for people. And then for those of you who are observant, you can see that it's UTC+8, which is the time zone for China. This was this fitted with the idea that they were propagating pro-CCP narratives, but what confirms is stronger for us is the third graph, where we mapped the tweets over time. And as you can see, in Golden Week, which is a national holiday only celebrated in China, there were hardly any tweets there. So this confirmed to us that first of all, they were coordinated, second, that it was likely employees, and thirdly, that they were China linked. But what we needed to do now was sort of look within the clusters and answer why were they structured in this way. And so my job within this was profiling the clusters. So we had about 220 accounts, and my job was, well, I had a huge spreadsheet and I had to go through and decide which elements of the spreadsheet were important and how else were they coordinated. So I looked at these 9 themes that you can see in front of you. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. The 2 that I will explain are tweet themes. That's any kind of overarching narratives that they were mentioning. So this could be pro-CCP, or they're mentioning the US, general countries or figures that these accounts are promoting. And then the second one I want to explain is tweet application. And that is the app with which these accounts were making the tweets. So in general population, you'd expect to see a lot of Android, a lot of iPhone users. In fact, what we found was many of these accounts were using Twitter web app as a way of communicating, which showed another sign of coordination. So first of all, I looked at these accounts all together. And what happened was across all 10 clusters, there were themes that linked them all together. And this was in their appearance, in their interaction, and in their content. So their appearance, it was very generic and basic. There was no effort really to hide their inauthenticity. So examples include 27% had generic women in the display photos. This was often model-like women who, it was almost like they dragged them from catalogues. There was no authenticity signals in there really. 73 accounts didn't bother putting a cover photo in, so there wasn't a lot of effort that had been put into the appearance of these accounts. Other things we can see across the board was the interaction. So nearly 80% of these accounts use Twitter web app to promote their tweets over 85% of the time. So that could be a signal of coordination as well, showing that these accounts are linked more than just their liking structure. Again, the content. So even though, as I'll go into now, the clusters had different things that they were promoting in them, across the board, there were themes that cropped up in all clusters. One of them was the denigration of Hong Kong. So when they mentioned Hong Kong, it was often as a failed state, that China needed to come in to assist the Hong Kong police. And then another interesting figure was Miles Kwok, who is a journalist that was criticizing the Chinese Communist Party. So a lot of these accounts were trying to fault him and denigrate him, likely because of his political views. So what I want to do now is, so those were the overall qualitative findings, but I want to show you how these how the different clusters differed from each other, as well as being part of these overall themes. So cluster 6 is important, first of all, mainly for its appearance. So as you can see on the bottom left-hand corner, we have Rebecca Hunter. So there's two pictures there. It's the same picture that they've used for the display picture and the cover photo. It's clearly a model that they've used. It's quite suggestive. You can see her bra. And all of these suggestive was also a theme across the board as well. But what's particularly interesting about this cluster is that 6 of the accounts used random sections from Dracula to put into the bio. So as we can see here, it's "and sleepless nights, he had been unable to speak with any." So it's an incomplete sentence on both sides. There's no real point. There's no association to Dracula in any of the other posts. What Graphica, a company, have written a paper about this, and they reckon that AIs have gone in and scraped a random sentence to maybe add a little authenticity to the bio, but clearly in this case it has not worked. What's interesting as well is we've got Rebecca Hunter. You can see right at the bottom that she's replied to an account, Shannon Black, and then we've also got Bridget Jones. So these are predominantly Western names, which they've put into Twitter, and you can see that their handles have 8 numbers on the end, which means that they haven't requested a different handle name. All of these contribute to the idea that there was very little effort put into making these look authentic and individual. Other points about this, the interaction, all the accounts are amplifying each other. So as you can see with Bridget Jones here, that although Bridget Jones has 0 followers, the post that you can see there has 5 retweets and 5 likes. And this was common, that these accounts were often getting more likes than followers, which again adds into the idea that they were linked by likes rather than a following network. The content is important to highlight here as well, is that instead of putting this controversial narratives in actual Twitter text, they were putting across pictures of text, and this puts across the message without actually getting picked up as easily through the Twitter algorithm, which is an interesting way as to how they evaded detection. So moving on then to cluster 4. So cluster 4 I've picked out particularly because it's really interesting in its interaction. So the appearance, again, is very generic, very little effort to make it look individual. We've got a picture of a model, and this time the cover photo is a kitchen. So very, very generic. But what's interesting about this cluster, as you can see through the network graph on the second one down, is that the structure of this network is that we have one primary account and then 4 accounts supporting the primary account. So in this case, the primary account is in Indiana, and then the other accounts are only liking and retweeting in Indiana's posts. What was interesting about this is that the feeder accounts were all created on the same day, sort of 2 at a time, and they all had between 92 and 96 tweets. So this, it's a very systematic and organized attempt to promote Indiana's work. Now, if you looked at this individually, you might argue that Indiana's a person that wants to promote her own profile, but what's important to reiterate is this is part of a wider network that is promoting pro-CCP and pro-China narratives. And so what's more likely is that in these different clusters, different people were operating them and trying to promote these messages in different ways. So this was more, we're seeing this more now as like a trial way to promote these messages. So that's cluster 4. And then I want to bring you to cluster 10 now, which is one of my, it's a really interesting cluster. So again, I'm repeating myself, the appearance was very, very basic. We had landscapes that nobody had bothered to put a cover photo in. It was all very generic. The interaction wasn't like cluster 4, all the accounts were sort of interacting with each other, but the content was really interesting. So we have rumors on the bottom left here, and the first tweet, this is a screenshot of the account that's still active now. The first tweet is, see the shadow when the tree is deep. This was written in Chinese language, and I've translated it using Google Translate, but it was more like just random proverbs which didn't have much implication about the account. The second tweet is a retweet from Real Madrid saying that they're looking forward to the match, the upcoming match with Manchester City. And then the third tweet is the motherland is a strong backing for Hong Kong to overcome the epidemic, with a link to YouTube. So they've sort of set the ground as a apolitical space and then gone forward to promote propaganda. What's even more interesting is they've done this by linking to a YouTube video. So again, they're avoiding Twitter algorithms by not putting all the information within the tweet, but outsourcing it to other platforms. What's important to note here is that all the YouTube videos that were linked to throughout all the investigation, all of them had been taken down by the time I got to research them, which sort of begins to suggest that maybe YouTube's algorithms are more efficient in taking these kind of content down. The other thing to focus on here is that this was the only cluster that mentioned US content. We were particularly interested in this as the timing of the tweet. So this is just before the US elections last year, it's October 28th, stating that the US epidemic was out of control. So moving on to a methodological point. So I sat down with all this data, and it was a real shame because by the time I'd got to analysing them, clusters 1 and 2 had almost been entirely suspended. Only 3 of the 56 accounts were actually available by the time I got to them. And it was such a shame as well, because if you can see here, you've got a big node, a big account supporting both 2 different clusters. So we were really interested to look into this, whether they were taking it in turns to support the clusters, or maybe the clusters were boosting this account. But unfortunately, we weren't able to investigate any of this because it'd all been taken down. And this is the ongoing debate and compromise that we have as disinformation researchers and the actual platforms, because it's fantastic that they are taking these kind of accounts down. However, without us being able to research it, we could have used these tools to find future accounts. So it's sort of trying to find a balance between these accounts that are still active now and ones that are almost taken down too quickly. So that's an ongoing discussion that we need to still keep on having. But on the other hand, it does show us something really important in that it shows that this structure is successful in evading detection. So this structure whereby you have very separate clusters with only minimal links between them means that almost an entire 2 clusters got taken down without affecting the other operations. And this is how the network is like analogous to a terrorist cell organization, whereby there's minimal links between multiple operations. And so to conclude quickly, when we're talking about behaviours of disinformation actors, in this case study, I can show you quantitatively and qualitatively that although there was overall similarities, there were differences between the different organisations, which makes it more of a terrorist cell activity. Remember again that it was a 9-to-5 pattern, so this is an organised attempt at disinformation. And then methodologically wise, regarding the methods, quantitative and qualitative data showed us really important elements of this network. And then again, the debate between the Twitter takedown is important to keep having it, because hopefully we'll be able to do more successful research with this in the future. Thank you very much. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now.